Try it out there first. If it works, then give it to me. Thank you. Here we go. Ayo, you're bringing us in. Studio, here we go.
Good morning, Lagos, and thanks for staying tuned here on Smooth 98.1. It's time for Freshly Pressed 981, where we give you detailed analysis of today's headline stories, and we enjoin you to send in your comments, reactions to today's headline stories as well. I'm Ayo Myro Essay.
And I'm Mazino Appeal.
Mhm.
And we're joined in the studio by someone that's very familiar. Of course, Folu
This
is with
introduction.
us.
Folu Psalms is in the building.
Good morning, Lagos. Good morning. Good morning, Mazino. How you doing, Mazino?
I'm good. It's like you're back here. It's like you never left.
Oh, I know.
All right, so this is how you can join the conversation. Send your message to WhatsApp 0809 444 On Twitter, we're at Smooth981FM. Kindly use the hashtag FreshlyPress981. And we're streaming live on YouTube. Search for us and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Smooth981FM Lagos. We have a few stories to get through this morning, so we'll try to do so as quickly as possible. First one here for Lou is an update on INEC with deregistering 31 political parties. We talked about this last week when the news broke, and we did say that some of the parties threatened or said they were going to approach the courts to sort this out. They have approached the court, and we have a judgment from Justice Anwuli Chikere of the Federal High Court in Abuja. Please take us through this judgment.
Okay, so what's essentially happened is they've restrained INEC from carrying out the planned deregistration of 31 political parties pending the hearing of the substantive suit of the actual main issue. Essentially, what was sort of put forward, what the plaintiffs put forward is he said, listen, a declaration that the power conferred on the second defendant by section 225A, B, and C of the 1999 Constitution to deregister political parties could not have been intended to have any retroactive effect, and as such, election into all constituencies must first be held before the power of the second defendant under this can accrue. They're essentially saying that, listen, until all conclusive democratic elections are held, not just into the presidency, but governorship, local government, chairman, until everything is done, this sort of, some of the provisions that that INEC are trying to rely on cannot take effect, and that's basically the summary of that. I know people have had different opinions as to whether it should be deregistered, whether it should not, especially when you look at the I always want to say that the preponderance of political parties, and you wonder, what is their impact at the moment. But it is within their rights, and that's another issue that's been put forward, because Justice Chikere actually said in the ruling held that the plaintiffs do have a legal right which must be protected, and consequently have ordered the defendants to maintain the status quo. So leave the parties there as they are until the full suit can actually be heard. That's kind of the summary of the story.
All right, thank you very much for that. Although I'm just trying to clarify the story, because originally there were 74 political parties that were deregistered. However, in this story we have 31 political parties.
It's talking about 31.
Yes, I'm wondering if they're the only ones who came together to pursue this in the courts. I've tried to. It doesn't say anything. It does refer to the 74 political parties deregistered. But it doesn't. So I'm wondering what happened to the, let's see,
how we ended up at 31. You're absolutely
31.
correct, and I have been trying to look that up to understand why there is a difference in these numbers. But according to the story which we have taken from this day newspaper, there isn't much information given to that. So perhaps it's 31 who are joining a class action suit.
Yes.
I'm not entirely clear, but we can confirm that later, and I guess we'll take
I think
that
from
out
this
to
story,
people.
they were since last year actually. They said they had March last year. They dragged the AGF and INEC for the Federal High Court over plans. So it was still planned then.
Absolutely.
So I wonder what happens to the rest of the 43 who are not in the suit. Well, thank you very much. We have some comments here on WhatsApp.
Okay, let me read that one. MI from let's just say MI said, did INEC have the constitutional power to deregister parties, and what are the technicalities of such a process? Why can't we just tidy up the legal details before coming out with such announcements? He says. That's MI from Akoka.
Well, that was part of what I just read out again. They do have constitutional power to do that, but the question is how they're wielding that constitutional power. Can it be done now, or can it be done when all the necessary elections have taken place? And that's what's being argued.
Richard Yemi saying hi for Lou.
Hi.
Thank you so much, everyone. Now we move on to the next one. Again, telecoms, Guardian newspaper reports that telecoms firms fume as Boko Haram destroys masts in Yobe. So suspected Boko Haram insurgents in 5 gun attacks, or 5 gun trucks attacked Babangida and destroyed telecom masts in their move to infiltrate Damaturu, the Yobe state capital, on Sunday.
Yeah.
Now, it's Babangida the place, not
Yes.
the person.
Yes.
And I think it's important for when you read through the story, beyond the human lives that we lose almost on a daily basis, as it were, due to insurgencies, also the cost, looking at the cost of insurgency. We think, there's a lot that we're probably not, in other parts of the world, perhaps they would monetize, they would do a detailed analysis of what we lose as a nation by this insurgency, and this is just one of them. Please take us through this story.
Okay, so The Guardian says that the telecom firms are really upset because Boko Haram have destroyed the mass in Yobe. But this is actually a very serious story. Now, you need to understand that when we're looking at terrorism and these sort of guerrilla attacks, what they're trying to do is instill fear in people. And a very good way of doing that is cutting out communications. In fact, it's the first thing that you want to do, even if people, and I know a number of Nigerians have had, unfortunately, armed robbery attacks, that sort of thing. Thieves, one of the first things they'll try to do is cut off your access to calling. At the time, we used to have landlines. That's what used to happen. They would cut off the landlines. So that's what we're seeing Boko Haram doing. And they've been doing this systematically for quite a long time. Now, Babangida itself, the town is 50 kilometers north of Damaturu, and it's been attacked alongside the Emir's Palace 4 times, at least even in October of 2018. Even recently, again, if I'm not mistaken, they attacked October last year the Emir's Palace, but the Emir did manage to escape to Damaturu. Now, some of the telco companies, including the Big Yellow Giant and the Red One, have been saying, we're going to, assess the extent of the damage. But this also speaks to collaborative issues within our government, and we always talk about that information and the paucity of information and how tough it is to get information across. Now, the townspeople have become so used to these sort of attacks that the story tells us that they tend to run into the bushes whenever this happens, which means it's almost quite a frequent thing. And we do have to be concerned because there are large swaths of our nation that really are not protected and cannot be protected efficiently. I mean, just a couple of days ago, we were looking or about a week or so ago, we were looking at attacks in northern Nigeria of the travelers that were killed outside of somewhere like Maiduguri, just outside of Maiduguri, and the gates were closed. And I could almost read the frustration in not just the governor who was saying, we called the army, we called you to be here, but again the army commandant saying, listen, we have this huge area to protect. We have given you a curfew of this time to this time, and we tell you that travelers, if you're coming from anywhere, if you've not gone on that road by 2 o'clock, you will not make it here in time for that gate to be open. You cannot expect men who are out in the fields, literally doing reconnaissance, working. I mean, you can only imagine what our soldiers go through to also somehow make it back to the gate to also protect you. So I mean, it's a very sad situation we find ourselves in the country, that they're comfortable enough to continue, especially communication towers, because that's a major risk.
If the terrorists themselves are strategic about exactly what they attack and how they do it, then the authorities need to be strategic as well as to what they're protecting and what needs protection the most from. So
the question is, why is that not happening? And again, this is where the Nigerian public becomes a bit concerned with our government, because there's clearly something there that you're not telling us. It's information that's always missing from these. And yes, there's security risks, but I do believe that the public deserves to know.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Sean says the same decimated, degraded, technically defeated Boko Haram.
Come on, let's let go of this. That's 2017 news. We all know this. We can't keep using those phrases.
And then I think Follow already answered this question being that Common says.
Yeah, he says the insurgents seem to be roaming around at will, whereas where was the military, he's asking. Well, first off, I think it's a very big expanse of land.
Yes.
You must note this,
Yes.
and quite frankly, there has been complaints about the manpower we have in the Nigerian military.
And globally, you must understand that guerrilla warfare is it's difficult.
Exactly.
It sells, and that's why it's so effective, and that's why it's so terrifying.
Exactly. All right, now we're going to move on to our next story, and this one's a very interesting one from the Punch newspaper. You're going to like this one. Reps order 400 exotic cars, and they reject Nigerian brands. So much for Buy Nigeria.
Oh, wow.
Now, the House of Representatives has resolved to acquire Toyota Camry cars, not just Toyota Camry cars, but the 2020 version, the models for members of the officials. The resolution was reached at an executive closed-door session held on February 5, 2020. This is reliable information from the Punch newspaper. I learned on Friday. Now, how much these will cost. These are not the exact figures, but these models for 2020, we were giving an idea of $5,000. That's between 9 million naira and $35,000. That's 12 million naira. Now, costs do not include the shipping cost, the import duty. You're looking somewhere around, if I'm not mistaken, about 30 million naira for the most, if not more, for these cars. So this is how much that might be expended for these vehicles. And the question is, why not encourage the Buy Nigeria, which we talked about so much, especially 2 years ago? What's happened to that plan?
I think it's very interesting, especially when it comes to our lawmakers. Whenever there's issue or there are issues of our lawmakers spending money, they become very anonymous. As you notice, even in this story, there's no specific name of any representative that's mentioned. They just say a Nigerian lawmaker. And in fact, they quote a lawmaker as saying, when they were asked, which cars are you getting? He said, it's a Toyota Camry 2020. Manga will supply 300 of the vehicles, and the person who supplied the Senate will supply the remaining 100. Someone suggested Innocent. I feel he was being sarcastic. He's from this tells us a lot about the confidence of Nigerians in things that we make and what we produce and what comes out of our land. Innocent Motors, I think, have been doing very well, pretty decently. They become a relatively recognized brand, at least in vehicles in Nigeria. We know what they are now, as opposed to maybe 5-6 years ago, where people are like, what is that? Where's that coming from? That is some progress. And I have to say, Nigerian people, until we put our foot down and insist that our senators and our people in public office are living off the land completely or almost completely, we're going to keep seeing stories like this. Every time we've got a Senate coming in, every time we've got new officials coming in, it's the same story. It's just, maybe a couple of different names. The prices always go up. They always get the new cars. Now, no one is debating that you need vehicles to move around. And really, the Toyota Camry is a pretty functional vehicle, if we're being honest. It's not, I think that the title is deliberately inciting, where it says, exotic cars. It's the Toyota Camry. It's a good car. I do understand why they put it that way, but it's done deliberately to make people feel a type of way. But the reality is they should be investing more in the country. But also the reality is, because we haven't invested in so many areas, including our vehicles, there is always going to be that question of performance. There is also always going to be that question of quality. And we don't know what the maintenance costs for innocent cars are. We don't know whether in the long run that may end up costing a lot. Whereas for anyone who operates some of these vehicles, including Toyotas, you know that there isn't as much work that's necessarily required.
Let me take you back some years, many, actually decades. I'm sure your father owned a Peugeot.
Absolutely.
Back in the days. Everybody. And if you worked for the government, that was
a standard issue car.
You definitely owned one of those. Whatever the question that I'm putting out there is, whatever happened to that era where it was possible to actually insist that these officials use made in Nigeria cars. These cars were made in Nigeria.
So from what I understood at the time, the government did have very close ties, and I do believe Peugeot had an assembly. Now the issues we've had with things like foreign direct here to do work is that government policies change overnight. Look at Okadas, for example. People or international companies and people who have a lot of money to invest generally are quite hesitant to put something so heavy on the ground, especially when our power situation has not improved. In fact, it's got worse over the years. Are not certain that the policies are going to stay in place, where someone else, maybe with a bit more clout in the Nigerian government, can wake up and say, actually, no, forget this contract that we signed. And they'll bring up some flimsy reason why it should be completely discarded. And that's really the problem. So it's costing all of us in the long run.
This article speaks to the appetite of Nigerians for foreign made goods. You know why I'm saying that? Because we have in this report that the lawmakers actually rejected not only Nigerian brands, but brands that were locally assembled in Nigeria. Exactly. So that's a big issue. Going back to the Peugeot.
That's what I said. We don't trust ourselves. We don't trust what is made here, because we've seen the lack of attention that each Nigerian, let's call a spade, puts into the work they're supposed to do. That's the truth. It's a bitter truth. It's a bitter pill to swallow. But we don't.
You remember when, I think it was the last dispensation, the end of the last dispensation, even the early part of this current one, where we had all these policies that were geared at making or helping us assemble these cars here in Nigeria. There were also queries that were raised. Regarding where these cars are assembled, do you know that even here in Africa, we actually have assembly plants that you can purchase even at a very considerably affordable rate from South Africa, for instance. If not South Africa, then the Middle East, you have them come in. I'm not exactly sure where these ones are being assembled, but
Vincent Mecca from Adiva says, if truly members of the National Houses of Assemblies rejected cars manufactured or assembled in Nigeria, what are the pressure groups and labor union doing? My God, these politicians will ruin this country. And then Shagun says, and the reps say you should pay more tax so they can buy better cars. we have this one.
This one
from
here says
Jelly.
a V6 brand new Toyota Camry 2020 is today in today's market goes for nothing less than 35 million naira. Yes, you're correct. That's what the article said. This is the same country looking for money to pay workers minimum wage of 35,000 naira monthly. Sense is far from us, he says.
And then Val from Lekki says, Mazino, please, where can I get the 2020
No.
Camry for 13 million naira?
In the abroad, it
Yeah.
has not been shipped yet.
Yes.
That's where you can get that.
That's excluding taxes. But guys, please pay your taxes, because part of the reason why we have this issue is because people keep saying things like, oh, well, why should I pay tax? But if you don't pay the tax, we can't sort out electricity bills. We can't have manufacturing plants here. We won't be able to have Nigerian cars.
I think, like you mentioned, it's a lack of trust, even from Nigerians, as to what their money will be used for. So, like Val said, it's exotic in an environment where we're still trying to push for 30K minimum wage.
Exactly.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, good day for the press here, it would seem. Journalist Agba Jalingo released on bail. This from the Premium Times for the detained publisher of Cross River Watch, Agba Jalingo, has access to the bail granted him on February 13th. He was arrested, if you remember, in August 22nd of 2019 and remained incarcerated till the court in Cross River State granted his third request for bail. This is the third time, and he was granted bail by Justice Sule Shuaibu of the Federal High Court. Folu, please, what do you think about this story?
So if I cast your minds back, for those of you who are not entirely familiar, Jalingo arrested and charged on 4 counts bordering on acts of treason, treasonable felony, threatening through various publications, using malicious publications. These are all the things that they said, and this was against the governor of Cross River State. Essentially, they said that Governor Ben Ayade diverted 500 million naira belonging to the state, and as such, he was facing this trial. Well, it's important to note that after 174 days of being detained, he's finally accessed the bail that was granted to him. Now, the bail was for 10 million naira, and there were a few people that were required to stand as surety. And not just that, they had to put down a refundable deposit of 700,000 naira to the court registry to perfect the bail. Decides to up and run away, that money is going to disappear. Now, I think it's important to notice that the previous judge had denied bail twice, and that was Judge Simon Amobeda, but he had to withdraw from the case because a secret recording the judge Amobeda allegedly made some biased remarks against Mr. Jalingo was leaked to the press, and that's probably part of what helped to get him free.
Yeah.
Now, this is really concerning, because again, when people see stories like this, it feels like an attack on the press, it feels like an attack on the media. I would love to read the details of what Agba Jalingo put forward, but I think a charge of treason for alleging that money was diverted, which is not, I don't think it's unreasonable, is a pretty high charge. But you also have to consider that proving things like slander or defamation is very difficult. So I imagine that prosecution, and I will give the prosecution props for this, as we say, because it was pretty thought out that if we want to get this person for something, this is a stronger count to get them on, rather than get them on, slander or libel or defamation. And the other thing as well is, as much as it is important for there to be freedom of press and for people to be able to report on things that are happening, we do also know that people report irresponsibly. We know that there are allegations that are thrown out, and once you put something like that out in the atmosphere, it sticks. It's very tough for you to say, oh, these government officials, like, they stole money.
Yes.
That's going to the truth, because already we spoke about the lack of trust the Nigerian people have, and if that or that person's just trying to do their job, it makes it exceedingly difficult for them to do that. Now, we know that governors are immune to, I do believe they're immune to prosecution while they're in office. But when he gets out of office, that's something that perhaps could still follow him. So it would be nice to see the full details of the case and see exactly what Agba Jalingo wrote. But it is good that he's been granted his bail, and that's important. And I hope that the matter is resolved.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Folu. We have some comments here.
Okay, let me peer in on this one. This is from Jennifer, by the way. It says hashtag Freshly Pressed. This is off of YouTube. These people are spending our tax money without consideration. They don't care about our security, but only care about their well-being. Thank you very much, Lita.
All right. Thank you for your comments. We have a few more here. Show me from Amowad office says, our lawmakers are greedy, unpatriotic, and self-centered. Why will so much be spent on cars? How can we grow as a nation if we cannot patronize our own products? He asks.
I think this is going to be a topic we'll be talking about inside the 9 o'clock hour.
Sorry, all these people that are shouting, are you even wearing a showcase walk?
No, but many of them
And
are
many people
wearing
in
clothes.
Nigeria.
Many of them are wearing clothes that they bought from Aswani. So that is
Whatever the case, these are people who are paying
Yeah.
taxes, and they want
Are they?
accountability for.
Mr.
Well, I'd like to think that everybody out there is actually
Yes,
a
no, I
very
do understand
law-abiding
that.
person.
Mm.
So
All right, thank you. Let's move on to this very interesting one from Punch newspaper. And I say interesting not because it's excitingly interesting, but interesting because it's funny. Women others tackle ASU for opposing sexual harassment bill, according
wait,
to the
what?
Punch newspaper. Yes.
Yeah.
So the various women groups and members of the National Association of Nigerian Students vehemently kicked against moves by the Academic Staff Union of Universities to shut down the anti-sexual harassment bill at a public hearing organized by the Senate yesterday. Now, this bill is sponsored by the Deputy President of the Senate, Senator Ovie Omo Agege, and one of the things that, of course, in light of the Sex for Marks bill, a number of issues that have come up in the media recently with regards to lecturers asking for sex for marks in university. But interestingly, one of the institutions I would have assumed would be one of the advocates of this bill are the ones saying it's not necessary. Follow, please take
Okay,
us to this story.
so the crux of the story is that the national president of ASU, that's Biodun Oguyemi, said that while ASU does not support sexual harassment, they do not believe that a law should be enacted to tackle it. When you see a statement like that made, it smacks of male privilege, unfortunately. And outside of that, actually, it just smacks of ignorance, because sexual harassment in our educational institutions is not new. It is not
No,
new
it's
in
not.
Nigeria. For decades, it has been happening. Almost every single one that I know has got a story, or their sister has a story, or their friend has a story. Their boyfriend is upset because the lecturer went to go and talk to his girl. It's almost standard
Yes.
practice at this point. If you university and you don't have the story, people are like, you didn't go.
Yes, our
You
parents
didn't
have
go.
stories.
So
We have stories for
everybody
some of
has
them,
stories.
yeah.
So I think it is the most ridiculous thing, and it goes to say that, I mean, I just think that, you know, some people need to sit down, Biodo, and ask him a couple of serious questions, because it seems very thoughtless. Now, having said that, though, you do need to understand that in his opinion, this is what he goes on to say, that every university has structures through which disciplinary procedures are handled. Now, if we follow the procedure that we have in place at universities and we link with our existing laws, we can address the same problem without necessarily coming up with a law. And that is true. We also do have a propensity in this nation to say, well, let's throw out this old law and bring in a new one without actually making sure the law has been enforced. And I will give him credit for that. I think that is a very important point to make,
Yes.
that the problem is not necessarily that the laws don't deal with it, although in Nigeria's case, I do think that they don't deal adequately with that issue, but that it's not even being followed. It's not being adhered to. But I think it was a very insensitive way in which he dealt with that, because this is a major issue. It does affect every woman for sure on every single campus, whether you're a lecturer yourself or you're a student, because the female lecturers, sometimes you have female students running to them to say, "Ma, this is happening, what do I do?" Some of them are complicit in what's going on.
Yeah.
So I think that it has reached the point where it is a pandemic. It is an epidemic. It's a problem,
Yeah.
and it should be tackled as a special problem with special punishments assigned just for that. If the punishments were severe enough and they were actually being carried out, you would see quite a severe drop. And we can't forget the very brave Monica Osage, who came out a little bit of time ago and led the case that led to the actual imprisonment of a lecturer. I don't think it's ever happened before.
No.
And she was heavily criticized. Her name was dragged all over the press, but at least it happened. And I think that just goes to show what could happen if we take this seriously.
my suggestion here is to both parties, both the women group and also the ASU itself, is make the women's group should also press for ASU to set up an apparatus to actually investigate these happenings.
But that is what has been happening,
So
as you know.
are they putting together these apparatuses?
Yes.
And are they absolutely what's the word now about it? Are they really going about this?
Now, if you go back and you trace everything that's been happening since Monica Osage, all these women groups have been very, very involved in saying, listen, you have to investigate, you've got to follow up, because the first issue is that when women report this, it's dismissed. In fact, they're discouraged from even reporting. And when you do report, you're targeted, you're victimized, you're harassed, you're dismissed. Now, I think why they jeered against this is that someone who ought to know better, who's in a public forum, is getting up to say it's not not important.
Yes.
You dare not say that's not important because it's not true. That's actually a complete lie. It is an important thing. You can suggest other ways that you want to enforce it, but the men have got to be a part of making sure this is enforced.
Absolutely.
If they don't stand behind the women, then all it comes down to, again, you have men say it all the time, these women shout, they're
They
shouting a
come
lot
again.
now.
So
And
perhaps
And
our
that's not
apparatus,
right.
perhaps our apparatus should be an independent authority, not one that is inside of us.
Which is
Ideally.
arguably possibly what the women are looking at. That if you have an independent a sort of council that deals with this, but you
Exactly.
have independent laws that deal specifically with this sort of transgression,
make headway.
it will be dealt with a lot more seriously.
Also, I think it speaks to a wider issue we have in Nigeria, whereby we don't have consequences for action. So it's not just
Absolutely.
in
It's
our
not just for this,
universities,
yes.
because you can create hundreds of laws and enact hundreds of laws, but if it is not being enforced, then there's no point. There's no point in that. So thank you very much, Folu. We look forward. I personally would like to see this being passed, even though yet there are procedures, but we need to send a strong message with regards to sexual harassment in universities and beyond. Let's move on to the next one. Still on laws and the Senate. Senate wants mandatory health insurance for all Nigerians, according to in the New Telegraph. The Senate yesterday urged the federal government to provide mandatory health insurance scheme for all categories of Nigerians. Shall please take us through the story?
All right. So they said that the chairman of the Senate Committee on Health, Senator Ibrahim Oloriegbe, made the call at a one-day public hearing to consider two health bills at the National Assembly complex. So one of the bills is seeking to repeal the already existing National Health Insurance Scheme Act 2004 to enact a National Health Insurance Commission, Bill 2019. Now, the second bill apparently is for an act to provide for the enhancement and regulation of mental health and substance abuse services, protect persons with mental health needs. Now, Olorigbe also points out that the NHIS only provides for optional health insurance in the country, and that really with countries that have progressed a lot in the way they deal with their health insurance, they've made it mandatory. That's a good idea in theory. The practice of it is if you make the health insurance scheme for all Nigerians mandatory, which is a very laudable thing, how is it going to be funded? Who's going to pay for it? What is the regulation that's going to go into that? Already as an optional scheme, the average Nigerian doesn't even know how to access this. Do you know how to access
Nope,
this?
I asked the question earlier. No one could
Exactly.
tell us.
It's tough. Once in a while they come out with this, but I know earlier this morning Rotus was talking about what happened to the era of awareness campaigns. There's no awareness on this. So I think it's a nice thing for the Senate to say, but honestly, it feels just a bit like grandstanding.
So if they cannot pay for every Nigerian to access, so like what we have in the UK, the National Health Service, could we possibly explore subsidizing it as he also recommends?
But subsidizing it, the money has to come from somewhere. We're already talking about tax issues, and the average Nigerian is tax averse. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to pay.
Taken from source, from salary, salary.
But most Nigerians are not salaried necessarily. Most Nigerians are not. And whenever we talk about taxing people that live outside that bracket, everyone complains and says, no, you can't tax nannies, you can't tax household, you can't. But that's the majority of our nation. That is the truth. Now, I think we've gone too far. We've gone too far into the Western system of existence to start saying now that, oh, this doesn't apply to us, or this doesn't work for us. We've already accepted it. We already have the laws in place. We already have all of this in place. And that's when, the tax man showed up. About women did their best back in the day, to fight against it. But everyone else, caved in. So the women were like, okay, we were out here trying to fight for everyone, and you said no. So here we are. So the truth is, there are too many people that are not paying for what they should pay for.
Yeah.
Too many of us why must I? Even down to simple things like our electricity. Yes, we know that there are issues with overbilling and overcharging, but how many people have just run NEPA lines directly into their homes? And we always justify it. We're going to keep staying in this position until we realize that, the chicken or egg situation, we could keep arguing it forever unless we just do what needs to be done.
Fabulous starfish. Do we have messages here? Let's
Yes,
read
we
this
do.
one. Daily says, I told Rollers this morning, this country isn't just ready for greatness. Our politicians can't even set an example. What's wrong in using a locally manufactured car as your official car? Now, says he, and he goes on, he says, what's wrong with us in Nigeria? What's wrong with our law? Our laws with the sexual harassment in schools. As long as we work towards executing the existing laws, we do not trust the disciplinary committees in Nigerian universities.
Yes, and that's the general feeling. Dele says sex for marks can be resolved by publishing answer scripts.
I don't
Not
get that.
exactly, to be fair. We need a stronger system to look into this. And George Kobani says sexual harassment isn't a woman's problem. Men's daughters, sisters, wives, nieces can be affected. My sisters were victims. ASU is a very homogeneous body focused on protecting lecturers, and they are generally closed worldview.
Mhm.
They may not support sexual harassment generally, but they will not do anything that makes their members more vulnerable. Very well said, George, and thanks a lot for your comments. Thanks everyone who sent in
Mhm.
reactions. Don't forget, we go in detail to one of the stories during Lagos Talks 981. So please join us at 9 o'clock. Thank you, Folu, for
Thank
joining
you very
us
much,
this morning. Really, really great analysis. And you will be joining us for Grapevine 901, right?
Yes.
Oh, will she?
absolutely.
Oh, that's grand. All right then. Stay tuned, Lagos. We're smooth.
Alright, that wasn't too
Thank
bad.
you. Yeah, it wasn't at all. It was good. It was really good. Thank you.
UTME. ASU.